Yossi Pugach, who is recording and who is hosting. We are streaming live on YouTube as well. And as usual, we have the recording of the Shiurim each week on the Ohel Ari website as a YouTube. So all you have to do is Google Ohel Ari, you'll go to their site, and if you miss the share, you can always get it there. So welcome to everybody from near and far. As I've said so many times, one of the great things about Zoom is that we can bring people together from all over the world. So I'm happy that we have a number of people who are not local, but are very welcome. And tonight's topic, I think, is a fascinating one. You'll decide that for yourself. The Enigma of Esav, villain or victim. Well, Parshat Toldot. You know, there are a lot of negative people in the Torah. The Torah is, again, it's an exciting piece of literature beyond everything else, with the amazing personalities and characters. And there are a lot of bad guys in the Torah. Too many to list. But there's Paro, there's Amalek, there's Lavan, there's Bilam, there's Balak, there's Korach, there's Abimelech, and there are definitely plenty of villains in the Torah. But it seems of all the negative personalities, no one really can hold a candle to Esav. He is the darkest of all. On the surface, it appears that there's no more black a figure than Esav. And you see this reflected in so many different sources. He is, first of all, called by the Gemara, Russia. Now, I'm not talking about Putin now. I'm talking about the Hebrew word Russia, which means the evil one. And the Gemara says about him, and there are many midrashim and Gemara, Talmudic sources about him. The Gemara says that on one day, and we'll talk about this later in more detail, he committed rape, murder, and blasphemy, all on the same day. The Medrash calls him a naval, a scoundrel, for lack of a better word, who filled the world with nevelot. So it's a play on words, naval, nevelot. He filled the world with corpses. In other words, he was a murderer. They call him a minuval, translated perhaps as a degenerate, who built brothels, each of which had a statue of himself out front. The Tanchuma says that when Esav left his mother's womb, he cut it up so badly that she could have no more children. And of course, we know that Rivka has no other children besides these twins. This, by the way, contradicts Rashi, who says that that Rivka only was able to bear the twins miraculously, that she was meant to always be barren. That's another story. The Chazal say that he hated peace, all the nations of the world hated him, that he captured and raped other men's wives until he finally married at age 40, which of course was the age when his father Yitzchak married, that he plotted not only to murder his brother Yaakov, but also his father Yitzchak, in one of the commentaries. Tanchuma says, all the crimes that Hashem detests were committed by Esav. The name Esav is usually meant to mean something in the category of asui, fully made, fully finished, okay? Because he came out almost, like a grown person. However, the Medrash in Breshit Rabbah says the word doesn't mean something else. Esav is a play on words with hashav. This one is a waste. In other words, God says, behold, I created something that has no redeeming qualities. Esav's legacy is summed up by the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Daled, which says, Ein Yitzchak matzil et Yosef. Yitzchak cannot save Esav from Gehenna. That's where he's headed. And the Gemara in Psachim Daf Kuf Yud Tet says, there will be a great Seuda at the end of days. And this Gemara goes and discusses who will be leading the benching, which is a great honor, of course. And when it comes to Yitzchak, it says, when he will be offered to lead, he will say, I cannot, because I fathered Esav. Esav is portrayed not only as the nemesis of Yaakov, but as the progenitor of both Amalek and Rome, the two arch enemies of the Jewish people throughout history. And it is a permanent, intractable hate. Amar Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, halacha hi Esav sonei et Yaakov. This is the common description of anti-Semitic behavior, that it's not logical, it's not rational. It is something that is in just simply there, a reality ingrained in world history. Esav sonei et Yaakov meant to mean that there will always be, at least till Moshiach, an anti-Semitic or non-Jewish hatred of the Jewish people. Well, this would seem to make for a pretty open and shut case. Indisputably clear, our conclusion that Esav was the eternal Rasha par excellence, a thoroughly bad degenerate with no redeeming qualities. And yet, as we dig a little bit deeper, we are bothered by certain nagging questions that won't go away. Questions that seem to whisper to us that below the surface, it is not all so neat and tidy and crystal clear. As the Torah rarely is, it is very deep, and as we know, 70 layers. But there are questions about Esav. How is it possible that such a Rasha emanated from such holy genes? After all, Esav is not some creature that lands on earth from another planet, who appears out of nowhere to make life miserable for the Holy Family. Esav is the son of the tzaddikim, Yitzchak and Rivka. He's the grandson of Abraham. He has the same blood, the same chromosomes, the same genes as all the Avot have. He studied at the yeshiva of Shem and Aver too, by the way, just like Yaakov. He is as Jewish as anyone in the Torah. And when we hear the name Esav, we think, oh, he's the ultimate non-Jew. He's not. He's Yaakov's twin brother. And how do we account for the fact that Yitzchak loved and favored Esav? Is this simply a function of Yitzchak's blindness, as some want to say, that he had this blind spot for his evil offspring and was totally hoodwinked by Esav's clever deceptions, implied in this phrase that Yitzchak loved Esav kitzayid befiv, which means literally that he put steak and good meat in his mouth because he was a hunter, but they also want to say he trapped Yitzchak and fooled him. And what about the kibud of, the honor that Esav showed to Yitzchak? Was this a case of hashochad yaver einei chachamim, einei tzadikim? Was he bribing somehow Yitzchak to believe that he was good when he wasn't? How do we reconcile a Yitzchak that is a Navi, a prophet, a Gadol, who's in constant touch with Hashem, and yet he's unable to perceive that his son has veered dramatically from the derech? Is this just another case of a parent who can't see that his own kid has gone wrong? A phenomenon, a syndrome that we've seen. But is this what we're talking about here? What about this honoring of his father that Esav is known for? Was this just a ploy to butter up daddy? Well, the Zohar says that no one in the world ever fulfilled the mitzvah of kibud horim like Esav. And Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is quoted as saying in the Gemara, in the Medrash, no man ever honored his fathers as much as I honored mine. And yet, he says, Esav surpassed me in this mitzvah. So that sounds pretty genuine. It doesn't sound like he's faking it. So before we try to struggle with this problem, just another thought about the nature of Esav's malevolent psyche. Because the Gemara in Baba Batra, Daf Tet Zayin, says as follows: on that one day, the day of Abraham's Shiva, his grandfather, he committed 5 heinous crimes. He raped an engaged girl, he murdered, he denied Hashem, he denied Tchiyat HaMetim, and he scorned and repudiated the Bechorah, the firstborn status, which is a pretty full day's work, if you ask me. But the only thing that's mentioned in all of this, of all those crimes, Vayivez et ha-Bechorah, he spurned the Bechorah. So the Balei Tosfot asks, well, the other crimes seem worse. So why is this the only one that the Torah actually mentions? So I saw a commentary by Rav Zweig. Is anybody here from Miami? He's the Rosh Hashiva in Miami. He's a brilliant thinker. And he says that his take on that is that everything kind of flows from the fact that Esav turned down this status of being a Bechor and all of the leadership responsibilities and expectations that come from it. Once you turn that down, once you reject this idea of following in the footsteps of Abraham and Yitzchak, then the other miscues, crimes, sins flow from it because you feel, well, I'm not going in that direction. I don't have to follow the rules. And pretty much I can kind of do whatever I want to do. And thus all these crimes that Esav commits. It's interesting to note that when we know this, we all know the story of Yaakov making this, a lot of, my son is making lentil soup, having friends over for Shabbat, and a lot of people cooking lentils because this is what Yaakov made for Esav, this porridge or lentils. Esav, by the way, a friend of mine, and I always mention this, his theory was that, for all you medical people out there, that Esav was hypoglycemic and he was a hunter and he needed protein, and lentils are a major source of protein, and he downs that, halitenina, the Rashi says, just like pour it down my throat, because he needs to have that. He comes in from the field after hunting and eating all this meat, which gave him this condition. But be that as it may, when we think of the story that Esav walks in as, again, this is the day of Abraham's Shiva. So Yaakov is making this meal, and we all have this concept that Esav is ravenously hungry. But when you look at the Psukim, it doesn't say that he was hungry. Instead, it says twice that hu ayef, he was tired. Well, if he's tired, let him go lay down. Let him go to sleep. But the deeper connotation of tired was that he's saying, I am tired of, as a firstborn, having this responsibility on my shoulders to be the torchbearer of the next generation. And, I don't want that burden. I'm tired of them expecting so much of me. And when you sometimes are expected to do too much, you go the other way. And you try to I'll show them that I'm not the person who's cut out for this job. We see also in these psukim that you have this rapid fire list of the things that Esav did. Vayochel, vayesht, vayakam, vayelach, vayivez. Right? That he ate, he drank, he got up, he left, he spurned the Bechorah, boom, 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 boom. One thing after another, because gives you this picture, this image that Esav, he was impatient. He wanted things done right away. He rejected the birthright perhaps because he said to him, first of all, he says, I'm going to die at some point. Maybe he was somewhat suicidal, but he says, I'm going to die. What do I need this for? I may as well take what I can get now. So give me the meal. I'll sell you the birthright for a simple bowl of porridge whatever it was that Yaakov made for him. This idea of, I don't want to have something that takes years to gain. The birthright is something that's only going to develop over many years. These boys are young, by tradition, 13 years old, right? So there's a long way to go till he's going to take over. And he doesn't want to wait. He's impatient. He says, give me something now. And that played on his whole character. I don't want to earn the money, I'll steal it. I don't want to develop a relationship with a woman, I'll just rape her. And this whole concept combining of, I'm tired of this being expected of me, and I believe in the here and now. And I'll take just a minute to talk about one of my favorite stories, made a deep impression on me. The story is told about Moshe Sharet, who Shertak was his original name, right? The famous Moshe Sharet, when leader of the state of Israel, when they were raising money in the pre-state days in order to establish communities in Israel. He went to see a very, very wealthy man who lived in North Africa. And he came to see him and he said, we are putting communities on the borders to establish our presence. So when the state is declared, we'll be able to define what our country is. And he wanted him to invest in a fledgling community in Kibbutz Chanita. And Sharet comes to him and says, I'm asking you to be the founder, to give the money to make this happen. And the man turned to him and he said, you know what? I believe in what's here and now. I believe in reality, what's in front of me. I can't invest in something that maybe will come true, maybe it won't. That's not my style. Well, as the story is told, some years after that, not long after that, Rommel, the Nazi general Erwin Rommel, began his march through North Africa, conquering one place after another. And this very wealthy man fled for his life with a small suitcase, was all he could carry, and lost all of his wealth. Years later, he came to this kibbutz. He asked, is there a kibbutz called Chanita? They said, yes. He came to the place and he threw himself down on the floor of the Beit Knesset there. And he said, when I had the chance to do something that would really have been a lasting tribute to me and something for the community, I turned it down. And now I don't have that. I don't have any wealth. I have nothing. It's a very powerful and true story. So, Esav is saying, I believe in the here and now. And this continues to paint this very dismal picture of Esav. But I want to go deeper. I want to take an in-depth look at another incident in the Torah that I think will give us a broader and maybe different perspective on the total Esav. In Parshat Vayishlach, Yaakov prepares, we're not there yet, but we'll get there. Yaakov prepares for this dramatic confrontation with Esav. They've been apart from each other for 34 years. And remember that Esav swore he was going to kill Yaakov. And now they're about to come together. So what happens? Yaakov divides the family into 3 camps. And he gets ready basically for war. And the Torah tells us as follows. I want to read you the pasuk. It's again in Parshat Vayishlach, and there the pasuk says, "Vayakum b'laylahu." Yaakov gets up at night. Vayikach et shtei nashav et shtei shivchotav. He gets his 2 wives and 2 other semi-wives. V'tachad asar yiladav, and his 11 children. Well, immediately Rashi wonders, 11 children? Excuse me, but aren't there 12 children? So Rashi spots this, immediately, and Rashi comments V'Dina heichen haita. Where was Dina? Natna b'teva v'na'al b'faneha. Yaakov put her in a box, in some kind of a container, and he locked it up. Shelo yitain ba Esav einav, so that Esav would not see her, turn his eyes on her. V'lakachne nash Yaakov, and for that Yaakov was punished. Sheman'a me'achav, that he deprived Esav of Dina. Shema tachzerena lemutav, that perhaps he would come back to be good. And as a result of that, he was punished. V'nafla biyad Shechem, and Dina fell into the hands of Shechem. Well, this is a very, very perplexing comment by Rashi, because if Esav was really such a rasha, Yaakov should have been rewarded for shielding Dina from this villain. He shouldn't have been punished. And furthermore, let us remember that in the original plan of things, Leah was slated to marry Esav, right? The older with the older, the younger with the younger, right? But Leah cried so much that her father Lavan took pity on her, and he surreptitiously substituted Leah for Rachel, using Yaakov's own precedent of the old switcheroo, right? When he pretended to be Esav at the blessings, at the Bechorah. But the Gemara in Baba Batra commends Leah for crying at the prospect of marrying Esav and recognizing his negativity. So why is Leah praised for avoiding Esav, and while Yaakov is condemned for putting Dina in a box and hiding her from Esav? We're going to address this in a moment. But first, I want to look at another comment that Rashi makes. It's also very fascinating. It's also in Vayishlach. It's in Lamed Daled, in the first pasuk. When Dina is kidnapped by Shechem, the pasuk says, "Vatetse Dina bat Leah asher yalda Yaakov," and Dina, the daughter of Leah, who was born to Yaakov, went out. And here too, Rashi sees this and focuses that it's a very strange description of Dina's lineage, and asks, why is she called Bat Leah and not Bat Yaakov? So Rashi answers, Ella al Shem Yitziata Nikret Bat Leah. Because of her going out, she's called the daughter of Leah. Sha'af hi Yatzanit. Leah too was, let's call it for in a moment, outgoing. Shenema Vatetse Leah Likrato, that Leah went out to meet Yaakov. Va'aleh mishalo hamashal ke'ima kabita. And from this we get the expression, like mother, like daughter. Let's try to understand what's going on here. Is this some kind of a subtle put down of Leah and Dina? But I think what Rashi is saying here, and this is the key to all this, Yitzchak saw in Esav the potential to be a full partner in the Eitz HaChaim, the holy family tree of the Jewish nation. Esav, who had tremendous physical qualities from birth, because we said he was born fully developed, he would rule the physical world and serve as a perfect complement to his twin brother Yaakov, who would direct the spiritual energy of society. The economy, the agriculture, the factories, the technology, this would be Esav's domain, acting in harmony with the pursuit of Torah scholarship and intellectual excellence and spiritual leadership that Yaakov would preside over. This would be a kind of Yisachar Zevulun model, or Yehuda Yosef partnership. King, Tzaddik, or king and Kohen, Melech and Tzaddik, put together into a very formidable twin source of energy. But the catalyst to this plan, of course, as you know, must be a woman, because nothing in Jewish life is going to get very far unless a woman makes it happen. So the catalyst to this plan was Leah. Yes, Leah was originally destined for Esav because it was ordained in heaven that Leah would have the qualities necessary to refine and bring out the best in Esav, to make him a mensch in the spirit of the family of Abraham. But Leah had a certain insight. She understood that the tribes, the Shvatim, needed to arise from a union between herself and Yaakov, as well as Rachel and Yaakov. That is why Rachel gave the password to Leah. Remember the story, to allow her to substitute and marry Yaakov. And that is why Leah, right, the password of Hachen, right, Hadlakat Neirot Chala Nida, this little 3-letter word password that the Medrash says was the password. But that's why Rachel gave the password to Leah. That's why Leah went out to meet Yaakov. She went out to inform him that the divine plan dictated that she, and not Rachel, would be sleeping with him tonight. And that was what had to happen. She was directing the action. And they would be creating a son and then another son, because it happened twice. Which 2 sons, by the way, were created in this outgoing act? You may have guessed it, Yisachar and Zevulun, who also formed that combination. Leah had what the Gemara calls a naim arukot, not a naim rakot, not soft eyes that were some say caused by her crying at the prospect of marrying Esav, but arukot, extended eternal vision to see what the Jewish people needed, even more so than Yaakov could see. Esav could not be a patriarchal figure, the father of any of the tribes. That could only be Yaakov. And therefore, Leah manipulated in an outgoing manner typical of the Imahot, like Sarah, who was outgoing vis-a-vis Yishmael, like Rivka, who directed the whole Bechorah scene. And so Leah manipulated the configuration of the Jewish nation. But Esav's potential was still there. There was still hope that his physical nature and energy could be channeled into service to Hashem and to the Jewish people. But it would take the right person to make that happen. That person was Dinah. For like mother, like daughter, she was also a yatzanit, not a negative pejorative term, but yatzanit from the word lahotzi. She is one who can bring out the best of another, who could assertively direct her husband's energies towards the good and the positive. She still had the genetic tools as Leah's daughter to make Esav the kind of person that Yaakov envisioned, which Yitzchak intuitively knew was possible. As the Medrash says, a pious man was married to a pious woman, but alas, they could have no children. They said, we must divorce so we can better serve Hashem. He married a wicked woman and he became evil. She married a wicked man and made him righteous. Says the Medrash, it follows that everything depends on the wife. I hope husbands are shaking their head yes at this moment. But Yaakov frustrated that dream when he hid Dinah for Esav, and he is condemned for it and punished for it. Chazal understand that his motives were not totally pure. Perhaps he wanted to be sure, as Rashi says, that Esav remained the evil Esav, thus retroactively justifying his having taken the bracha by subterfuge. Had Esav turned around and become a full partner in the structure of Am Yisrael, Yaakov's actions would appear all the more despicable. Perhaps he wishes to justify, out of love for his mother Rivka, the bold decision to initiate this plan to wrest the bracha from Yitzchak. Whatever the motivation, Esav never fulfilled his positive potential, and from him descended the 2 great tormentors of the Jewish people through eternity, Amalek and Rome. I want to suggest, to kind of close this up, that there are 2 critical lessons to learn here. The first is that within every person, no matter how perverse, no matter how despicable he or she may appear to be, there is the potential for good, the Tselem Elokim, the spark of divinity. For we all come from Hashem, who is the source of all good. And he infuses into every one of us his Shechina with Kedusha. Esav had that spark, but it was not fanned into a proper flame, and so it produced an Eish Zara, a malevolent fire which burned and continues to burn us to this very day. Secondly, we should understand the problems we face as a nation are not imposed on us because we are a preeminent people. We are not imposed upon. We create our own destiny. It is our choices that determine our fate. We don't have to sit and blame others for what happens to us. We are able to create our own destiny. Had we chosen better via Esav, vis-a-vis Esav, we might have produced a Bill Gates who was the president of the UJA rather than a Hitler. We might have produced a Rome which underwrote Jewish greatness rather than undermined it. It's interesting to note that Amalek descended from Esav's son Eliphaz, right? He was directly descended from Esav, from Eliphaz and his concubine Timnah. Timnah wished to convert, and she sought the approval of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov in turn. And she said, better to be a handmaid to this God-fearing nation of the Jewish people than to be a royal princess of a foreign nation. But she was rejected by the Avot. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Daf Tzadi Tet, the Gemara castigates the patriarchs and says they should have welcomed and not distanced her. And so she bore a deep grudge and hostility to Am Yisrael. She passed that down in her mother's milk to Amalek, her son. We created that monster, no one else. It's fascinating. The same language is used by Hagar. She said too, better to be a handmaid to Sarah than a princess of Egypt. And she came close to the Holy Family, but Sarah mistreated her. And Chazal tell us that our oppression at the hands of Mitzrayim was a direct consequence of how Hagar was humbled by Sarah. There too, we were the source of our problems, not an outside energy. We err when we look outside to blame our fate. We should always look inward. Esav was a Russia, to be sure. All the frightening adjectives used to describe his tortured and torturing life are well-deserved. But Esav could have been a positive son of Israel, an asset to Klal Yisrael, because he also had a Tzelem Elokim. But he and we did not make it happen. Finally, at the end of this week's Sedra of Toldot, Rivka and then Yitzchak urge Yaakov to go to Lavan's house to seek shelter and a wife. And the pasuk says, this is, I just say it in English for you in the interest of time. This is in Perikaf Chet, pasuk Hey. And Yitzchak sent Yaakov to Padan Aram to Lavan, the son of Betuel, the brother of Rivka, the mother of Yaakov and Esav. Rashi is bothered by this. He sees right away this listing of the lineage is very clumsy. We understand why it identifies Lavan as Rivka's brother. This justifies sending Yaakov to the home of a rather unsavory character. But why does the pasuk identify Rivka as the mother of Yaakov and Esav? We certainly know who her children were, and it seems to add nothing to the narrative. And here's the kicker. Rashi has an amazing comment here. Rashi says on this strange phraseology, Eini yodea ma melamdenu. I have no idea what this is teaching us. Why is it telling us here that Rivka was the mother of Yaakov and Esav? Duh, we know that. Rashi brings up the point to tell us something doesn't make sense, but then he informs us, I can't solve the puzzle. This is strange, very strange for Rashi to ever say. So not to be presumptuous, but I want to suggest why it's said like this. At the end of this traumatic episode of the bracha, even after Rivka, in effect, has sold out her own flesh and blood, her own son Esav, whom she carried for 9 months, she still feels the pangs of remorse, the torment of ostracizing a child for what she believes is the good of the nation and our history. When all is said and done and the smoke is cleared, Esav is still and all a child of Rivka, and he is identified as such. This is the tragedy of the unfilled potential which she carries with her and never fully relinquishes what my son Esav could have been. Someday, says the Midrash, and you can look in the Parsha sheet a little more on this, they asked the rabbi, someday the dream will come true. What Yitzchak knew was possible will happen. Says the Medrash, Esav and Yaakov's descendants will forge a partnership, right? One of them akin to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and the Roman Emperor Antoninus, who were friends and who actually worked together. And someday that will come true as well in the end of days, when there will be an end to this Esav Soneat Yaakov, where there will be a joining together of the forces, the physical and the spiritual, the material and the religious, and that dream of Yitzchak's will come true. And then we will know that Geula is truly coming close. This is the story of Esav, and why you cannot simply say Esav Harasha, Esav the villain. Perhaps in many ways, Esav was the victim. I will stop, and I see, just to look at the chat here, I can't answer the question about why Dinah. It's a good question. It's one of those, the questions better than the answers. Did Dinah suffer for Yaakov's error? Unfortunately, sometimes this happens, and we are all sometimes a victim or suffer the consequences of the things that our predecessors put into motion before us. And that's part of what happened here. But this great dream, which is really the ultimate, messianic idea, or the Geula type idea, that these forces will come together. And to some extent, I have to say, and you probably guessed this as well, this agreement with Dubai and the Emirates, in many ways, it very smacks of exactly what Yitzchak had in mind, that if there will be this tremendous, this cooperation of the tremendous wealth of the Emirates and the spiritual presence, not just for financial reasons, but the growth of Israel, and the what we represent to the world through these two forces coming together, this is messianic in nature, and no one, I think, should dismiss that. The fact that these very, very rich countries, and maybe more to follow, are going to form an alliance with Israel. This is exactly what Yitzchak had in mind, and perhaps it will continue. And this is the dream. So if anybody has another comment and they want to add to what I have to say, you're welcome to. For the next, you can unmute.